Hello, everyone. Welcome to your Monday mini lesson on the origins of slavery. I hope you had a great weekend and are ready for an awesome first week of quarter four. I'm going to start this quarter's word list learning and exploring the Civil War with a week-long lesson on slavery. We'll be looking at the origins of slavery in the United States and sort of what life was like as a slave. So I'll be pre-Civil War stuff. On Friday, we're going to explore how slavery may even be impacting us today in 2020. And then next week, we'll really move into a more of a discussion on how the Civil War or how slavery impacted the beginning of the Civil War. So today, I want to start by talking about what slavery is and how it came to the United States in the way that it did. Can't decide if I want my hair behind me or not. Good. Okay, guys. So slavery is when slavery as we know it in the United States was when you own another person and that person is your property. And then because they are your property, you are allowed to do what you want with them. And most often what that meant was that people, slave holders and owners would use slaves for work to complete their work. They were free labor. This meant a lot of things, but one of the most important things that it meant was that slave slave owners were able to have a greater profit because they had free labor. If you think about a business, let's think about Roscoe Village Books. The owner of Roscoe Village Books has to pay their workers, and the money that they use to pay their workers means that their overall profit of their company is less. If they didn't have to pay their workers any money, then the company would make more money. So if you don't have to pay your workers, you make more money. And that's essentially what slavery was in the United States. Slavery had been around for a very, very long time. In Nigeria, um, pyramids, as they say, they collapsed. It is not always been um, We'll also continue to think about that on Friday as we think about how slavery impacted this country. Um, I'm sure there's people who disagree with me, but I would go so far as to say that slavery did not start uh, based solely on race. I think it started on convenience. Pretty bad idea. Let's go to Africa. Kidnap them. We are, and we'll bring them over to the United States country and make more money. I'm not saying that there's anything good about that and noble, but I don't know that it necessarily started as the idea of killing a race. Obviously, impact of racism started as a concept, started as convenience, and so I think that's something to look at and sort of examine as we look through today's website and try and start to think like, well, when did it really people in England, this is another thing that us to sort of understand based on our current mindset. They did believe that some people were better than others. And that was just sort of the belief of that time period. If you were part of the royal family, if you came from royalty, if you had royal blood, it was believed that you were ordained by God and that you were therefore were better. You were better than the peasants, and you were more noble, and you deserved a better life, and you deserved more things, and you were capable of being smarter and making decisions because the lineage of the king was ordained by God. That was part of the belief system of England. So it was not a very far leap then for um, people of European descent to say, well, clearly we're better than these other people, all these other people, Native Americans, people in Africa. They look different, they act different. We're better than them. So this idea of now, certainly, yes, that is probably well, I don't know, it's hard to make value judgments, but that's a terrible, terrible mindset. But it was part of the thinking of the Europeans that we're just much better than everyone else and we deserve a better life. And I think where that just that impact of it. And so it wasn't necessarily like I'm better than them because of the color of my skin. That could be one factor, but there could be multitude of other factors in that went into it as well as race. Um, so I think that's just an interesting thing to look at, especially as you go through the timeline and think about kind of when it did become about race, because eventually the descendants of the African, people who are brought up from Africa began to outnumber the European descendants in America in the United States. And so when that ratio began to switch, well, then it can't be because of where you came from, because we all come from the same thing. So we have to find a new thing to show that you're better than us, and that that became race in a lot of ways. So that's one thing I want you to think about today as you go through the timeline. And then we're also going to think about sort of why it started. And slavery started as for money. And it started for money and it started for convenience in a lot of ways. There was a continent, the entire continent of Africa. It existed. It was easy to go there and it was easy to kidnap people and to take them to the new land that had been discovered. So a lot of slavery began as convenience. And so with that, I'm going to show you, I forgot how to share screens for a minute. There are so many things. Okay, I'm sharing that. And then, I'll close that. Of course, I've forgotten what, nope. This is what I want to show you. So this is the triangle trade route. This is how the economy around slavery sort of was built. It was built in the 15th and 16th century. You can see some arrows here. I know it's a little small for you to see, so I'll read it. So we have Europe, we have Africa, and we have North America. And so we have Europeans bringing textiles, so fabric and cloth, rum, and manufactured goods to Africa. While they're there dropping off those items, they would kidnap some Africans and then bring them over to the Americas as slaves. And then the slaves would work on plantations to help the plantation owners and slave owners grow sugar and tobacco and coffee. And then they would send that back to Europe, drop that off in Europe, pick up some things in Europe to bring down to Africa, and then return to North America with slaves. So you can see this was a very convenient system that developed and that was based on economy. In no way am I excusing the horrors of slavery. It is really, truly unimaginable. I believe we're going to look at some accounts from Frederick Douglass and some other people. And I think whenever I've taught slavery to students, there's that moment of like, well, wait, but what? Like, really? Like, how did they think that they owned the people? And I think that is, thankfully, a question that we ask today because it seems almost unfathomable. But it was based on economy. It was based on money. How can we make the most money possible? We have all this land that we found and we want to farm it and we want to raise money on it. We don't have enough people from our countries over here. What will we do? We'll get more people and we'll force them to work for us. They will work the land and then we'll send back stuff to Europe and we'll make money. So slavery is based on economy. It was based on money. And that's important to remember as we move into the conversations on the Civil War, because that economy of slavery didn't end. It didn't go away as North America became the United States of America. It only deepened the importance of slavery to the economy. So as we talk about causes and starts of the things that started the Civil War, that's going to be an important part of that conversation as well. So understanding the idea of economy with slavery is really important. So that's kind of the overall idea of what I want you to take from why it started, and thinking about that idea of people felt they were better than, but I don't think better than was always related to race. And today, while you look through the timeline, I want you to kind of see if you notice a couple things where you're like, oh, I can kind of see what Ms. Ryan was talking about. So you're going to look through this timeline only up until 1778. These directions are all in Google Classroom, so you don't have to be writing this down. And just look through the events as they occur. Read their short. Apparently, it's not gonna let me scroll right now. There we go. And it will walk you through sort of how slavery developed in this country. I did just want to point out, I know this is a pretty common image, and it's not even on here. I thought it was. But the image of the slave ship, and the idea of these slave ships coming over, and just really how really awful they were. I think it's worth it as we study the history of our country to look at one of the things that began it, and that was these incredibly brutal situations where these bodies would be crammed into a slave ship. They didn't care how many people died. It was easy. They would get them there. People were kidnapped from their homes. Mothers were separated from their children. Families were separated and torn apart and thrown into these ships and brought to this completely different land and forced into labor. And I think just taking a moment to really understand that and think and just sort of acknowledge how horrible that was, and how hopefully with our current mindset how really unfathomable it was to do that to people. So I thought that was going to be a picture of the slave ship. It is not. You can kind of see it here. um, you've probably seen that picture before. It's a very famous picture of the diagram of how could they get as many bodies as possible into the bottom of a slave ship, and then to make the most money possible. There was no accounting for human life or suffering. So that is what you're going to do for today. There is an assignment in Google Classroom that's going to ask you to scroll through this timeline, and guide you through a couple questions. One of the questions is asking you to connect the timeline to what I just said. One of them is asking you to look at how slaves revolted against slavery, and think about how sort of kind of thinking about in the United States, how slavery, like when it became really a very more of a institution of convenience, and really turned into an institution of like racism and prejudice and ignorance, and that sort of timeline of that. I'm having you stop this well before the Civil War. You're stopping it when the United States started the Revolutionary War. So you're really looking back at the beginnings of slavery just to get an understanding of that. All right. I will see you in a bit. I'm going to record all my mini lessons right now, so you'll get to see me in the same shirt. And yeah, if you have any questions about this or about the sheets, I will be in Google Hangouts at 11:30, so you can come and ask questions.